Interpersonal conflict is a fact of life. Eventually, all relationships experience conflict. It's been estimated that people in stable, romantic relationships experience a conflict episode about twice a week. And you're more likely to have a quarrel with a romantic partner than with anyone else. So, conflict management is not just a single skill, but it is a set of skills. And to manage conflict effectively involves more than just learning simple techniques. The best route to success is resolving conflict effectively and requiring knowledge about what conflict is and what makes it happen. So conflict can also be thought of as it's a struggle. It's a struggle over something. So today we're going to look at a few skills. Hopefully our problem hasn't resolved into conflict. That's why we talked about defensive measures. What can we do to alleviate our relationships so they don't go into conflict? But conflict does happen. And conflict can actually be a positive thing that we'll look at here in a second. But if it has resolved into conflict, we need some skills to help alleviate this relationship. So let's first look at a basic definition of what interpersonal conflict is. Interpersonal conflict is an expressed struggle between at least two interdependent people who perceive incompatible goals, scarce resources, or interference in the achievement of their goals. Now let's break this definition down and talk about it a little more. First, it has to be an expressed struggle. You typically don't know that someone is upset with you until he or she expresses displeasure with a remark or by nonverbal behavior such as a mean glare or their facial expressions or maybe their paralanguage. Some people just keep their emotions in and you never know that they're aggravated with you or they're upset with you. So the conflict has to be expressed. Now here's the problem. You don't want to express this angrily. If you do that, you're just throwing more fuel into the fire. But there has to be a verbal or emotional expression made to the other individual. Experts surmise that one reason violence is so prevalent in many relationships is that people don't have the correct skills to manage conflict. That's what we're going to talk about today. Also, conflict has to be between at least two interdependent people. By interdependent, we mean that people are dependent on each other. What one person does or says affects the other. The old expression, "it takes two to tango," suggests that it takes at least two people to have interpersonal conflict. Now, you can certainly have interpersonal conflict or intrapersonal conflict, which is conflict within yourself. But interpersonal conflict is between you and at least one other person. It could be three, it could be four people. And a good example of this is maybe high school sports rivals. When I was in high school, I played football. We had our normal in-state rival. But there was another local team that we played, and our school hadn't beat that team in over 30 years. So for our team, our goal was we were going to beat that team. We were going to be the first team to beat them. And we considered that team as a rival. Now that other team didn't look at us as a rival because they had always beaten us. So really there wasn't interpersonal conflict between these two teams. We thought there were, but the other team didn't look at that. That's why it has to be expressed, and each group or each person has to be dependent on that other. If it's in a relationship, maybe you're dependent on that other person because of money or because of love or attention. You are dependent on another person. So that other person, they can actually cut off whatever it is that is important to you. If it's time, if it's love, if it's attention. So there has to be a codependency in the relationship. And incompatible goals, scarce resources, and interference. Conflict often happens because two people want the same thing, but both can't have it. Or because what one person wants is the opposite of what the other wants. Or when the resources, or time, or money are scarce. If this happens, then there's more likely that there will be tension in the relationship. So if it's scarce resources, if it's time, maybe you're spending more time at work and your spouse is aggravated or upset. Why? Because time is scarce. Or maybe it's because of money. There's not enough money. Or one of the people in the relationship isn't using the money wisely because money is a scarce resource. And that interference to achievement of their goals. People in conflict want something. And many conflicts occur because both people can't have, or at least they perceive, they can't achieve the same goals. It may be different goals, or it may be the same goal. Maybe it's raising a child. You may have different views on how to raise the child. You both have the same goals to raise the child as best as you can, but you may look at the ways to achieve this differently. Let's look at a situation that we see. This happens every semester at universities when it comes to dorm rooms. A lot of times you can't choose who's going to be your dorm room partner. And when this happens, there's usually prior conditions, which means there's differences that you start to notice. For example, if you're at a university and after a few weeks you notice that there's a difference between you and this individual, maybe you are an extrovert. Maybe they are an introvert. Maybe you are an only child and maybe they are the oldest child. Remember our discussion of the birth order. Maybe you have a strong work ethic and maybe they are very lazy. Maybe you like to keep everything clean and tidy. Maybe they're messy. These conditions have happened before the relationship took place. So that leads us to another stage, which is called the frustration awareness. This is when you know that there's a difference. You know that the problem is starting to increase. Then that leads to what we call active conflict. Now, active conflict does not necessarily mean that their differences are expressed with shouting or emotional intensity. You just let the other person know. And you let the other person know verbally. But you don't use this in any type of aggressive behavior. Now, if it was passive, you'd just think about it. You'd keep it within yourself. So, active conflict, you actually express the difference. And then that leads us to resolution, which is either good or bad. It can either be worked out or it can't. Couples either come back together or there's a divorce. And then after that, there's the follow-up. You try to see about the hurt feelings. Is there any way to continue to manage the relationship? Did you know that conflict can be positive? We're all aware that conflict can be negative. It can be very destructive. For example, cyberbullying and hate crimes and stalking, aggressive verbal or even physical abuse. That is the negative part of conflict. But what about positive aspects of conflict? Well, it can be constructive if it helps build new insights and establishes new patterns in a relationship. It can clarify that we need something to be changed. Conflict can be exciting, it can be creative. Now we can come up with a new idea to make the relationship stronger. Why? Because we didn't know that there was a difference until conflict has occurred. So we're always aware of the negative aspects of conflict, but we also need to be aware that there's positive views of conflict as well. It can keep relationships interesting. It can strengthen relationships by increasing your confidence that you can manage. And that's the key. Manage relationships. Well, then what about some myths? We've looked at myths before when it comes to interpersonal relationships. Now let's look at 4 myths when it comes to conflict. Number 1, conflict is always a sign of poor interpersonal relationships. This is a myth. For example, everybody does this. It happens to everybody. In fact, overly polite people get in disagreements. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're an aggressive person, but some of the best people and some of the best communicators in the world get into conflict. So it's not just a sign of poor interpersonal relationships. We just agree to disagree. Number 2, conflict can always be avoided. This is a myth as well. There were 2 professors of communication, especially interpersonal communication, that were a married couple, and they were both professors at a major university out west, and they traveled to other universities giving lectures and speeches on conflict resolution, and they also were marriage counselors. They went to seminars and talked to people and talked to couples that were having problems. This couple knew how to communicate, but guess what happened? They eventually got a divorce. These 2 professors that were at the top of their game when it comes to interpersonal communication, and they ended up getting a divorce. They couldn't work it out. So that example there, that looks like number 1 and number 2, looks like those 2 myths, and proves that those are just myths. Number 3, conflict always occurs because of misunderstandings. Nope, you may agree, but you may disagree on how to handle it. For example, maybe both you and your spouse know that your child has done something and the child needs to be punished. But there's a disagreement on how to punish the child. Maybe you want to ground the child for the weekend. Maybe your spouse wants to ground the child for a lot longer. Or maybe not at all. So you both know that there's a problem, and you both understand what the problem is. You just have different ways or different ideas for the solution. And then finally, conflict can always be resolved. Consultants and corporate trainers, experts, authors, they have books and seminars on advice how to resolve conflicts, but it don't always happen. That's why there's company splits. That's why there's divorces. Maybe you've had some best friends in the past and something happened. You got in an argument and you're no longer best friends. That's why relationships are so deep. That's why interpersonal communication is so important. So no, conflicts can't always be resolved. Let's look at the big 3, or the 3 types of conflict: pseudo, simple, and ego. So let's look at the first one, pseudo conflict. Pseudo actually just means fake or false conflict. It occurs when we simply miss the meaning of the message. For example, if two friends were walking home after school and one friend says, "Hey, let's walk to the store." The other says, "No, it's too far, let's drive." "But the store's closed." "Well, no, it's not." "Yes, it is. It's just off of Market Street." Oh, yeah, you mean the convenience store." "Well, sure, that's exactly what I mean." Oh, no problem. I thought you meant the supermarket." Well, that's just a pseudo conflict. Nothing major, but it could have ended up going into more of a simple or even an ego conflict. It could have gone into a shouting match, but it was just a simple misunderstanding. Some things that we need to do to keep from going into a pseudo conflict is to use good verbal skills. That's why we spent time talking about our communication skills. We need to clarify anything that our partners don't understand. We need to watch their nonverbal reactions. If we watch the nonverbal reactions, then we need to clarify even more. You can always over-clarify if you want to avoid some type of conflict. And we need to avoid defensive confrontations. We need to use more of the I statements. Then we have simple conflict. Simple conflict is conflict that stems from different ideas, definitions, and perceptions or goals. For example, you and your spouse want to go on vacation this summer, but you decide you want to go to the beach and they want to go to the mountains. Okay, we have a simple disagreement. You know exactly what you believe, and they know exactly what they believe. So now, in order to alleviate this, we need to clarify you and your partner's understanding of the issues and your partner's understanding of the source of the disagreement. We need to look for many options, and you want to focus on the details and don't drift back and forth in personal grievances. Don't whine or don't get emotional. Stick to the issues and look for solutions. And find that kernel of truth in what your partner is saying. Find agreement where you can. Then the last one is ego conflict. This is conflict in which the original issue is ignored and the partners attack each other. And they attack each other personally. They attack each other's self-esteem. This is the type of people that says the best defense is a good offense. And they're looking to pick a fight. Ego conflict, the issues now have been watered down, and now it's just about fighting and making sure that you are right and you are going to win in this argument. One of the things that we need to do when it gets to this point is, again, we need to go back to the basic facts of the disagreement, and we need to open up many options, and we need to use more I statements. And I statements are messages that we have talked about before, but besides saying, we could say, "I feel uncomfortable and threatened when we yell at each other." That's a good I statement rather than a you statement saying, "You're such a creep. You never listen. You're a jerk." That's more judgmental. We want to keep things from getting to that point. And when it gets to that point and it becomes a shouting match, then there is no way that we're going to resolve the main issue. Judgmental language leads to defensive responses in other people. Keep it to the I statements and keep it on the facts, on the issues. And conflict and power. Often what we fight about is not what we really are fighting about. It's usually about interpersonal power. Interpersonal power is the degree to which a person is able to influence or control the other person. Sometimes this has to do with perception. This might have to do with our worldview, the way we look at things. Power exists in all relationships. The definition of interpersonal communication that we talked about at the very beginning suggests that there's mutual influence, and that's essentially the element anytime you relate to others. When you talk, you are attempting to exert power over the other person, if for no other purpose than to get them to listen to you. So, power derives from the ability to meet a person's needs. One person has greater need for the partner to satisfy his or her needs, and power is out of balance when one person depends on someone else to meet his or her needs. Unfortunately, some people want more power in a relationship and more control in a relationship. We need to look at the source of power, and we need to consider, do we require that much power? How can we share the power? A healthy relationship has a even division of power. You give and you take. Not only do we see this in our personal relationships, but in our work relationships as well. We need to give and take both. If you look at this little chart, one of the things that happens in every sort of argument or disagreement we have is that one word, fear. If you can keep this chart in your mind the next time you have some type of conflict, I really believe this will help you in the future. If you look at this chart, we have a threat or a perceived threat. Then somehow fear is involved, and in that can lead to conflict. For example, let's say you have interviewed for a job after graduation, and this has been the job that you have wanted for years. You finally got the call, and they said you can start Monday. You're excited. You go to work, and the very first day at work, you're meeting the people, and you're trying to learn what's going on, and you're still being trained on the first week. And as Friday comes around, your boss says, this has been a good first week for you, and we think you're going to catch on quickly. How about meeting with us the first time that we come together at 9 o'clock on Monday, and I want you to bring this presentation about your goals and what you want to do for our company. So you work on the weekend, and maybe you come up with a couple of charts that you print out, and maybe you've got a PowerPoint that you want to use. And you come to work Monday, and you notice that you have a lot of voicemail and some email that you have to answer, and you give those printouts that you had to the secretary and tell her, say, I've got a meeting here at 9 o'clock, and I'd like for you to make 25 copies of these if you don't mind, and make sure that there's a computer set up in the meeting room, and I've got my PowerPoint on my jump drive, and I'll be ready to go. So as you go through and look at your emails and answer your voicemails, and then you go over your notes, you walk down to the meeting room, and it's about 5 till 9, and you put your jump drive in the computer and make sure the PowerPoint works. And now people start coming in, and they sit around the table, and you notice that you don't have any handouts. You walk back to the secretary's office and ask them, where's the handouts? And she says, oh, I didn't know you needed them right away. Okay, you're mad. So there's been a threat, and now you are mad. What are you afraid of? You're probably afraid of looking bad on your very first day. Well, what about it? You go out in one Friday, one Saturday evening with some of your friends, and then you decide to meet up with some other people and you're introduced to someone that you don't know, but your best friend knows that person. And as the evening goes along, your best friend starts making fun of you in front of this other person, and everybody gets a good laugh out of it, except for you. You're mad, and you're mad at that friend. But where is fear in this situation? You may be afraid to look bad in front of somebody that you don't know. I bet if you sat down and thought about all of the horrible arguments that you've been in or disagreements that you've been in the past, if you thought long and hard, you would find that fear was in the middle. So the next time we get into an argument or a disagreement, try to figure out what the other person is afraid of or what we are afraid of. And if you know what you are afraid of, verbally describe to that other person what you are afraid of. You're clarifying your feeling and your issues before it gets into major conflict. There's different ways to handle conflict. If you look at this chart, we have accommodating and avoidance, collaborating, and competitive. Let's look at the first one. On the bottom left-hand side, let's look at avoiding. Avoiding is basically a lose-lose situation. This is the person using the avoidance conflict style. They want the problem or the conflict to just go away by itself. They may appear uninterested in managing the conflict or in a meeting needs of the other person involved. They back off. They stick their head in the sand. They just want it to end. Now, other times, people avoid conflict because they don't want to hurt the feelings of others. And there may be times when avoiding a major blow-up with someone is a wise strategy. But hoping that the conflict will go away on its own may not always be the best plan. So normally this is a lose-lose situation. Sometimes you need a cooling off period. But you need to come back and you need to look at the issues. Then we have accommodation. This is a lose-win. I lose, you win. This style might be for people that don't want to rock the boat. Others want them to do so, but in reality, they also accommodate to serve their own interests, to get people to like them. This conflict management style is sometimes called the lose-win, but if you consistently accommodate, you end up sacrificing your own needs so that someone else can win the argument. Then we have competition. People that are competitive. I win, you lose. Each of us has some need to control and also some need to be controlled by others, but people who have competition, conflict management styles, they want to win at the expense of the other person. To claim victory over their opponents, they want to control others. And people who use this style usually and most oftenly resort to some type of blaming. They want to seek a scapegoat rather than assume responsibility. They'll say, I didn't do it, or don't look at me, or he made me do it. These are typical blaming statements for people that use the competition or competitive conflict style. And we have people that like to collaborate. Collaborate is actually a win-win. To collaborate is to have a high concern of both yourself and others. People who use this style likely view conflict as a set of problems to be solved rather than a game in which a person wins or loses. All sides of the conflict need fresh and new ideas, and it's important to look at the feelings, and the feelings can be intense. You want to look for the best solution. Some of the biggest disadvantages is that it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of skill and practice and energy just to manage this effectively. So if we look at this, we actually use a lot of these ourselves. we don't stick with one, but some of us probably use more than one. And these are skills that we have to learn. So one of the best ways to look at managing conflict is things that we've talked about so far in this class. We need to improve our verbal skills, our communication skills. We need to tell people and clarify our meanings, our thoughts, our feelings. We also need to use good listening skills. We want to not only hear what words are being expressed by other people, but we need to look at the feelings and why they're expressing those feelings. We need to watch the nonverbal expressions. Most of us probably trust nonverbal communication more than verbal. What is the nonverbal? If they say that everything is okay, but their nonverbal expression says otherwise, then we need to stop and talk, clarify. We need to show more empathy rather than sympathy. Put ourselves in the other people's shoes. And we've mentioned I statements. We should not be judgmental. Use I statements and use statements that aren't aggressive, because we don't want to create a defensive climate. And we want to be aware of differences. We come from different cultures, different generations. We have gender differences. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We are completely different, and we need to be aware of differences. We have our own worldview, and we need to understand. Doesn't mean we have to accept what the other people believe or what they might think, but we just need to understand. If we can use these 7 skills, I truly believe that we can help minimize conflict in our lives.